Welcome to In Talks With, I'm Danielle Radoichin, and in this episode we're exploring the world of Tom Wesselmann, an artist who is both a key figure in American pop art and an outlier within it. Wesselmann's work is bold, immediate and unashamedly about desire. His iconic Great American Nudes series, his vibrant still lifes, and of course the subject of our conversation today, his so-called penis paintings. A lesser known but fascinating part of his practice, these works push his signature style of flat, graphic, larger-than-life compositions into deeply personal territory. They also raise all kinds of questions about the male gaze, eroticism and the shifting perception of his work in contemporary culture. Joining me for this conversation is Jeffrey Sturgis, director of the Tom Wesselmann estate. But Jeffrey isn't just someone who oversees Wesselmann's legacy, he also knew the artist personally, working with him in his studio and his home during the 1980s. That direct connection gives him a unique perspective, not only on Wesselmann's work, but on the man himself. We recorded this episode at Almine Rech Gallery in London, where Wesselmann's penis paintings are currently on show until the 12th of April 2025, bringing these striking and sometimes humorous, always provocative works back into the spotlight. We'll be exploring what these paintings meant to Wesselmann, how they fit into his wider body of work, and why they still challenge and intrigue viewers today. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Danielle.
It's a pleasure to be meeting you here today at Almine Rech Gallery in London.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm so glad you could see the show. And I know you told me you had seen our exhibition at the Fondation Louis Vuitton last week, which is a really important context, I think, for this exhibition as well.
Yeah, it was a really great precursor to this one. So we're here to talk about an exhibition which is on show here of paintings by Tom Wesselmann, which is also what's on show at the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris. Tom obviously died in 2004, but you have a special connection to him. Not only are you the director of the Tom Wesselmann Foundation, you also worked with Tom at his studio and at his home. So that to me makes this very special because it's not often I get to meet someone who was directly connected in that way to the artist. And then, and having you talk me through the paintings here earlier made me feel like there was this direct thread back to Tom. So I wanted to set the scene a bit first for people who may not know too much about him or have heard him or who are interested to get to know him a bit. He was born in Cincinnati in 1931.
Yes.
What kind of upbringing did he have? Was it a solid education, religious?
He came from a middle-class family. His father was a businessman. He was the middle child of a family of three. The way he tells it, nothing particularly special. He went to university in Cincinnati and actually studied psychology, which is an interesting sort of detail about his upbringing and his sort of the formative years. But while he was there, the Korean War began and he was drafted into the army and he ended up going in training. He didn't go to Korea. He didn't fight. He wasn't one of those soldiers, but he did spend his draft time in the army. And I think it was a time where he says that he was kind of bored. He was doing his, the obligatory service, and he was taught how to interpret aerial photographs. And then he ended up teaching others how to do that. But in order to sort of amuse himself, he started drawing cartoons. He was making fun of army life. He was entertaining his, fellow soldiers. But again, it's another sort of important sort of building block, I guess, in the career that he had.
You can see that he's already attracted to a sense sort of showing humor through his
work. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's something that's really, really a part of who he was as a person, this sort of attraction. I think this just the pleasure of humor was something that really, really grabbed him. And then when he finishes his time in the army, he sort of marries his college sweetheart during the army and goes back to Cincinnati, finishes his studies. And while he's there, he's also taking classes at the University of Cincinnati, drawing classes. And his teacher tells him, he says, look, if this is something you want to pursue, you should go to New York, go to the Cooper Union. There's no fees. You can go there for free. I know.
To recognize
this
that
is
talent.
The path. This is what you do. Go to New York. So he moves to New York. A lot of the soldiers are being supported on the GI Bill, so he has a little support to do that. He moves there with his wife. But I think, being in New York, he was there. He was making his cartoons in his first years at Cooper, and he was going around on Wednesdays where you would submit your cartoons to the magazines for publishing, and he did get some of them published. But being in New York, I think, really changed him. It changed him as a person. He saw something that he hadn't seen before. I mean, the way he tells it, I don't know if this... He tells it that, the only artist he knew before he came to New York was Norman Rockwell, because he had seen Norman Rockwell in the Saturday Evening Post. But being in New York and being at Cooper Union downtown, not far are the galleries where the abstract expressionists are showing. He makes friends with other students who are really interested in painting. He has a very good friend, Mark Ratliff, also from Cincinnati, who he spends a lot of time with. He meets Jim Dine. And I think this period, he really starts to think about who he is and what he wants to do. Also, what happens is his marriage to Dot starts to falter. He does separate from her. And he goes through a really troubling period for himself personally. He even starts going to therapy. It's actually Jim Dine recommended a therapist for him that he could go to and try to sort of sort out a lot of things that he had sort of brought with him, ideas from Cincinnati that maybe weren't some things that he wanted to continue with. And also what's going on at this time, things like there's a sort of new openness towards sexuality. The birth control pill is released in 1960. There's sort of new ideas, and he is a man from the 50s, sort of moving into a new decade where there's a new openness toward things.
Yeah, there's also, there's just so much exciting stuff happening in New York at that time, right? I mean, there's the music stuff, there's jazz, there's like Coltrane and Miles Davis,
exactly.
And then there's the Greenwich Village, there's the folk art movement, and then of course all the art stuff. I mean, you've got like de Kooning, you've got all of the abstract expressionist movement happening. I mean, how much was he engaging with all of that scene that was going on?
He was going to openings, he would go with his friends. Even the one thing about him that's kind of wonderful is that, through his diary and through his writings, he has these little sort of stories that he tells about different ideas that are important. And I think this kind of goes back to the cartoon idea, this idea of how do I communicate something very succinctly and very directly. I think that's kind of the basis of what a cartoon is, and that kind of
and that
thinking.
Billboard kind of mentality as well,
Exactly.
like almost like an advertisement, like get the message across.
Well, get it across quickly and impactfully. And I think that's something that sort of carries through into the work as well. But he talks about going to the Met and going to the Modern, but seeing paintings like the abstract expressionists and getting a real sort of visceral feeling, a visceral reaction to these works.
You couldn't get more more of a difference from Norman Rockwell to those abstract expressionists.
I think he talks about the sort of aggression involved in that kind of painting that he really responded to. It was like a new way of thinking about what painting and what art was exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
But it obviously wasn't a path that he could follow.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So he actively sort of rejected that whole thing, and he talks about de Kooning a lot and how he was sort of jealous of him, but he actively turned against abstract expressionism.
It's very deliberate.
Not for him.
Very deliberate. And he talked about this idea of just doing the opposite. Like, there was something he loved, he realized he couldn't do it. The only path forward was to go in the opposite direction. So and it was a program that he sort of set up for himself. If de Kooning made big paintings, he was going to make small paintings. If de Kooning made abstract paintings, he would make representational paintings. It was very well sort of thought through.
Quite a
and
contrarian.
Methodical. He was a radical, a maverick.
More than a contrarian, a radical and a maverick. Yes, love that.
Yeah.
And he was inspired. There's a lot of influences in his work as well from Matisse, Bonnard, those French masters.
Matisse was really, really important.
Yeah.
He, at about this time in the sort of early 60s, like 50s, early 60s, he buys this small sort of pocket book of Matisse reproductions. It's actually a book by...
Were they in black and white?
No, they were in color.
Yes.
They were in color. It's the author was Clement Greenberg. And it's a small book. It's only, I think, maybe 5 by 7 inches, something like that. But again, he went through this methodically and looking at how did Matisse make his compositional decisions. And he tried at first, he tried to do the opposite. Like if Matisse would do one thing, he would try to do something slightly differently. But of course, when he did have his first exhibition at Tanager Gallery, it was actually the first thing that everyone recognized. They looked at the paintings.
What year was that? Sort of now?
It was 1961.
So is that when he started his Great American Nudes series as well?
This first exhibition in 1961 was titled The Great American Nude, and it was actually titled Great American Nude Collages, because there was painting involved, but there were a lot of collaged elements. And one of the sort of very famous critics, Irving Sandler, talked about that. He talked about this idea of the nude image, but then also all these elements that he was collaging. And he said, look, what really sort of shocked me about these paintings wasn't the eroticism of the nude. It was actually all of the billboard and advertising material that you had pasted on. That was really shocking to me. The idea of bringing in everyday life in a very sort of direct way.
Yeah, it's like
in a very tangible way.
You can see like a cereal box or a radio, or elements from domestic life, elements from advertising. It feels very sort of consumerist. But then you see suddenly a Matisse like hanging on a wall in the painting.
Exactly.
So,
this sort of colliding of these two worlds, this world of high art with consumer culture. And you could even think about these collage materials. I mean, this is kind of throwaway material. These are things that people would have seen constantly and never would have valued. And here they were being placed in an art context, in a place of sort of reverence almost.
It's so interesting that at that time the critic was shocked by that rather than the sexuality. It's almost like inverse to how people might look at it today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The way that we look at branding and trademarks and
we're
symbols.
so marketed at all the time. I was just thinking about how he must have come across those Matisse paintings. I mean, it was hard, unless you actively went to see an exhibition or to the library to look in books, you just couldn't automatically look up images or.
It's true. Yeah. And in a number of the Great American Nude paintings, he includes posters or reproductions of very famous paintings. And he was doing exactly the same thing. Yeah. He would go to the museum and he would buy a large reproduction or a poster, and he would take it back to the studio. And then at some point that would end up being included into the painting.
I just love the Great American Nude is just the best name.
It's amazing. And
ever.
Again,
how did he come up with that?
It's
so simple yet.
So direct, and it says so much. I think, I had mentioned cartoons again. I think it's a way of thinking that he was so adept at, that it just sort of occurred to him. This is perfect. And it says so much about the subject, about what his sort of aim is, and how we as a viewer are supposed to sort of read these things. Because in some sense, it's an ideal, right? As the title, it's sort of I think it sort of indicates an ideal, the Great American Nude. But it's also a bit of a joke too.
Yeah.
And even the way that he presents it, it's a bit funny. I mean, I think he sort of elevates this idea, but at the same time, it's sort of open to, sort of a second look. It's like, well, is it really? Because it's almost questioning in some sense as much as it is. I think especially the way the series develops, it's also kind of a question, like what is? And I think we have to remember that he's talking about an idea when he says the Great American Nude. This is an idea that something we all think about. It's not necessarily a directive about what a woman is. Yes. It's what is this ideal that we think about.
Yeah, because at the time, it's like pin-up culture just coming out of late 50s. You've obviously got the ultimate pin-up Monroe and all of those from the 50s. So it's very American, this idea as well.
I think he's really questioning that idea. And even, there are several Great American Nudes. There was a black model. And even in one case, he wanted to work with the idea of scale. So she actually laid down on the painting and he traced her. So it's actually a tracing of her. And I think this was a way of, again, sort of imagining, well, if what begins the series is my love of my wife, because many of the studies are all called This is Claire, or there are other models he worked with. But then the title of the finished painting is The Great American Nude. So even if the inspiration is something personal, the sort of public display of the idea is something that we can all think about. We can all sort of enter as an idea. We're not pushed out saying, "Oh, that's his wife." We shouldn't look at that, or we shouldn't think about that. This is personal. The idea, and how do I, think about that?
Yeah. So you can understand why he got sort of lumped in with the pop artists. I mean, you can see him. You think of Lichtenstein, you think of Warhol. But he wasn't really interested in that, or he didn't really want to be labelled as such, did he?
I think he didn't. I mean, he wasn't the only one. It was a common sort of response to the idea from many of the artists. They didn't want to be sort of lumped in as a group, because I think what then could easily happen
really
is you could
competitive with each other.
Well, exactly. They all wanted their own.
Yes.
They wanted to be seen as individuals.
I did look in Warhol's diaries for references to Wesselmann, but I only found one mentioned in passing.
But I think, again, this is something I think they were competitive. Absolutely. I mean, there is a passage in James Rosenquist's autobiography, and he talks about those early years, and he does say, actually, the first pop exhibition was Tom's exhibition. And you can go back, and I've gone back and look at the dates, and he's absolutely right. Because Tom's first exhibition at Tanager, The Great American Nude, was in December of 1961. Mm-hmm. Lichtenstein's first show at Castelli, I think it's February of 1962. Mm-hmm. And then Warhol's first show at Ferris in Los Angeles, I think, is in July of 1962. So they're all happening very quickly, one after another. But his show actually literally was the first. And, now you look back at the history, and that really is the beginning. And I think what Irving Sandler said about, being shocked by the advertising ephemera in the painting sort of confirms that.
And was he aware of the stuff happening in England at the time with Richard Hamilton?
1962, there was a show at Janus Gallery called The New Realist. And I think that probably would have been one of the first times that he'd seen a lot of European artists. I mean, I don't know the history of all of them exhibiting in the States at that time. But that was a sort of an important exhibition for him to be seen, but also to sort of see what other people were doing. I mean, even though, he was sort of lumped in with all the other pop artists, and he was being told by, the sort of first dealers and collectors that he was speaking with that, oh, so-and-so is doing something like what you're doing. Then we did see the work. He said, well, actually, they're not doing anything like what I'm doing. I mean, he did recognize what was unique about what he was doing.
I love that photo, which is blown up huge at the Louis Vuitton Foundation, which is a massive black and white photo, and it's Tom Wesselmann, but standing with Andy Warhol, I think James Rosenquist in it as well, Lichtenstein, and then in the middle, randomly, Jean Shrimpton, right, standing there. I mean, it's such a great photo, but
it is.
I think it must have been at one of those exhibitions. One of those.
It was at a Warhol exhibition.
Warhol,
yeah, it was a Warhol exhibition, exactly. What's funny about you see those 5 artists there, and then there's the Lucy Lapart book where the essay that sort of defines pop art. She names the same 5 people.
Yeah.
Even what I just said about the exhibitions. I mean, these
was
are
he
the
named in that?
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
He was
I
named
know he
as
got
one
left
of the
out
5.
later on.
Every artist feels like they don't get enough attention. They are not included in enough exhibitions. And it's true, there were certain, exhibitions that he was left out of, and he did feel, sort of feel slighted by those things. But he was an enormously successful artist, and immediately.
Yeah, he was selling straight away.
Immediately. Right? I mean, if you think about like the way young artists today, their sort of careers skyrocket. I mean, this was as fast, maybe even faster. I don't know, because he finishes his time at Cooper Union in the spring of '59. By 1961, he's already having discussions with the Museum of Modern Art about an exhibition they're doing about the figure. this is all sort of leading up to this first exhibition at Tanager in December of 61, where he has his first solo exhibition. There are already collectors coming because he's already met Dick Bellamy, who with the Green Gallery, who is going to bring collectors, and Ivan Karp. These are all the sort of really important young dealers that are involved in the scene at that time. So already that first exhibition, he's selling to collectors like Joseph Hirshhorn, which then becomes the Hirshhorn Museum. That's very, very fast. And then by the following year, with this exhibition at the Green Gallery, he has a sellout exhibition. He can stop teaching. You know, his sort of life in some sense is kind of set. And that whole decade is really important in terms of the number of sort of pop art exhibitions that he participates in. It's quite an amazing rise. Yeah. But you have a long life, and that might not go at that pace for every decade.
I think it's also it was just at that time it was an explosion of stuff. What about I'd love to know because you met him and worked with him, but what was he like to meet in person? Like, was he tall? He looked like a tall person.
He was a tall man. Yeah, he was a bit taller than me.
He introverted?
He was thin. He was a kind of an introverted person, but he could also be very direct. He wasn't. I wouldn't say he was shy, but he was reserved. He's also very friendly. He would sort of, we talked about cartoons and his sort of sense of humor, even in terms of, the imagery and some of the paintings sometimes. But, he would sort of say funny things, like he would sort of finish painting in the studio and he would leave the studio area and go into the office area and say, "Oh, delight me." And and I don't know, maybe that's a dad joke today, I don't know, but it brings some levity, and he's sort of he's being fun, and even describing the sort of painting process. There was a time in the sort of late 90s that there was a documentary made about him, and it was something he was not particularly happy about in the beginning when he was first approached,
about being filmed,
about having to talk about the work and everything. But he said, "Look, you can come to the studio." There was a dealer, Carl Spendon, that sort of organized this, who wanted to do this film. He said, "Look, you can come, bring your team, sit over there in the corner." And, he got used to them. And then he actually did participate. And I think he really enjoyed it as well.
Was he a vain man?
I don't think so. No, I wouldn't say he was vain. But when he said he was ready and they sort of participated, then he said, I'm going to paint over there and you can film me painting. And so they filmed him painting, and then he started talking about the painting, and he says, he's done one coat. He says he finished the first coat. He said that I'll have to put the second coat of paint on. He said, because in the second coat, that's when the art goes in. And this is another one of these things where he likes to sort of bring a little bit of
provocative, a bit fun,
he's
bit
very
mischievous,
dry, and that kind of humor.
Yeah. And how's your opinion of him changed from when you first met to now?
I remember, so I met him in 1989. I had moved to New York. I finished my art school in Baltimore. I moved to New York, and I wanted to be an artist assistant. I was like, I see this as a path somewhere. I don't know where, but this is a path. And so I wrote a letter to him along with 100 other artists, and I got some responses, and he called me up and he said, well, come on in, we'll see how it goes. So I remember coming in the first day, and I came in the door and I saw this painting leaning on a sort of painting rack, and immediately I recognized it, and my mind went straight back to my art history class, and I said, oh, that's who this is. Because I had picked artists. It was a Tondo painting, and at the time I thought it was a Great American Nude. I had imagined it wasn't. There was another painting he did later that was kind of like a reprise of that Great American Nude, and I think that was the painting, because what was distinct about it was this sort of Tondo form. That's what sort of captured my attention. But I sort of realized right away, oh, this is who this is. And like I'm saying, I had picked names kind of randomly, but not really random, more deliberately. At the time, there was a magazine, I think it's Art in America is still around, but at the time they had this every year they would come out with this publication that listed all the artists in galleries. And I looked in the index, and it was the index of all the artists. And I would look for names that had a lot of numbers behind their name, because that meant they had a lot of galleries that means that high production, they probably needed assistance.
Smart.
And I sort of went through and found those names and wrote to them. And I did, like I said, I did get some other calls from other people, but by that time I actually really liked the environment. It was a really nice place to work. He was a really nice man to work for. He was very
he's already in his
empathetic.
late 50s, was he?
He would have been in his late 50s, but he was born 31, so he was in his late 50s then.
Still energetic, working every day. You said earlier about how much of a
absolutely
sort of workaholic, or more just incredibly dedicated.
I think he was dedicated. I mean, you could describe it as workaholic, but I think he was just really dedicated. It was this world of painting that he lived in.
Did he go away? Holiday?
So summertime, he had a house, and the family still has a house up in the Catskill Mountains, and he would spend their summer vacation in the Catskills. I mean, he would continue to work.
But he was a real family man as well, right? I mean, his family
absolutely.
adored him.
3 children, and we would see them at the openings. It's a lovely family. Yeah. Yeah, really
You're still in touch with them, obviously.
Every day. Every day.
Let's Jeffrey, let's talk about the show here.
Yes.
The exhibition. Tell me how it came about, what it is. Give me some explanation.
It was really sort of wonderful. It was Almine's idea to really sort of focus on this series of penis paintings. It's something, these were first shown in 1970 at the Janus Gallery. It wasn't just this series of penis images. It was also, there were a lot of shaped canvases. So there was mouth painting, smoker painting, breast paintings. And with a lot of these sort of isolated body part paintings from this bedroom painting series. And I think that it seemed like to her that this was really the moment to do this. This was the moment to sort of show another side of the career, another side of the work. And I think to me, what it really shows is a real sort of openness to subject matter, to possibilities, because, obviously this series comes out of, it sort of develops from the Great American Nude. And I mean, he talked about this sort of formalist idea that, the nude, if I put the whole nude in there, the orange is so small. How do I make the orange big? So if I focus on a smaller part of the body, then the orange can be very big. And that was the kind of formalist idea he was thinking about. But I think it also points to a kind of sense of intimacy. Are you being drawing in the viewer? It also relates to a lot of the collage material, the scale that he used with the sort of billboard collage. As a way of making a very impactful image. That's really what he was after, is how do I wow them? How do I really, really get them sort of visually excited about the image? I think what's special about the content or the sort of imagery is that with this erotic content, he's aware that you're going to have a strong reaction to it. And I think that was the thing about making these penis paintings, is that he knew that he was going to get a strong reaction.
What was the reaction to them when they were first shown?
There is one review that I think that really characterizes...
Quite hard to shock 70s New York. No?
Yeah, you'd think, but it's an interesting reaction. There was a review by Peter Sheldall about the exhibition. And in one part, I mean, there were other elements to the exhibition, but one part of the review, he talks about these penis paintings, and he describes them as jokey. And so he really sort of separates the way one would view the image of a penis versus the image of a breast or a foot. And Tom had a really sort of strong reaction to that, and he actually made a point of noting this down in his diary. And he said, why is, and he would use different, why is a prick more jokey than a tit? Like, what is it about that? And there's something to me that in terms of that sort of attitude, something almost kind of naive, right? Yeah. Like, of course, it is a common way of sort of thinking, but that he didn't want to continue with that way of thinking. He wanted to be sort of more open and see, well, why not?
Also, he is a provocateur. I mean,
yes,
and he does have that history of bringing humor into his work.
Absolutely.
Also, this just struck me, but artists obviously have inserted themselves into their paintings since Renaissance time. So, but I don't know if if an artist had ever inserted their own penis into the artwork before.
Yeah, I don't.
Is there a precedent?
I don't know if there's a precedent exactly. But I know that, I mean, what's sort of special about these, I think, is actually the fact that, these, I mean, also in the case of the penis, it's been separated from the body. I mean, we don't see a body. We don't know who exactly. Yeah. So we as a viewer are sort of really forced to consider this body part in and of itself. I mean, it indicates a body, but the body's not there.
And it's like we were saying earlier, as we were standing in front of the images, they're very, very flat. They're two-dimensional. They're kind of...
They are.
And the shape becomes more important than what it's representing somehow.
I think so. I mean, you could, especially when you see several of these bedroom paintings together, you start to recognize all of the elements that are there that are recombined in different amounts. I mean, because not every element necessarily is seen in full. You might see part of an orange or part of a flower, but you'll see that it's the same elements repeated over and over again and just sort of moved around. And so there's a kind of formalist game going on in terms of the construction of the picture, but there's more that is the background. I mean, what's foregrounded is the body part, whether it's the breast or the penis or the hand. That's what's foregrounded, and then the background is sort of shifting around. And I think that is kind of significant. It's like, how do you excite? One way, think about it. How do you excite formalism? What do you do? And you sort of insert this very strong subject matter.
Also, it's human body parts becoming still life.
Absolutely.
So it's a strange stillness and almost they are sort of, and the context or the frisson is taken. But I mean, the other thing is they are about all of these different parts that he's taking. They are very sexual things, whether it's the mouth or whether it's the breast or whether it's the penis. They are all
are sexual. Yes, it's true. But I mean, he even talked about that idea because and he said they're really like a Rorschach test. Again, back to psychology, but this idea that, well, there's no sex to be seen. So yes, you as a viewer could imagine what the rest of, what else is going on, but you have to sort of fill in the blank, just like the way that he sort of forces us as a viewer to deal with the dropout paintings. When a section is missing, we as a viewer, we have to fill that in. We have to use our imagination. We have to be active as viewers. We it's not all given to us.
When I see his work, not so much in this exhibition, but certainly when I was at the Louis Vuitton Foundation, looking at the nudes, looking at the mouths, you do get this sense of hetero male gaze.
Yes.
And probably very much of its time as well, would you say, in a way that was acceptable at that time?
Absolutely.
Mad Men era.
Yes.
But it's maybe not as acceptable. Was that something he thought about? Did he just not care? I know that some feminists sort of derided him in the 70s.
I don't know that it wasn't that he didn't care. It was that this was his point of view. I mean, you could say, okay, that point of view is unacceptable, but it is a point of view. I mean, he is a white heterosexual man, and this is what he sees, and this is what brings him pleasure. And I don't know that that's all that different from the way things are today. What's wonderful is we have new voices expressing what is pleasurable to them. Yes, that's wonderful. But I mean, his point of view is just as, I would think, is just as acceptable. It doesn't mean that we all have to.
It's his authentic self, to use a phrase that they use today. Yeah.
He does him.
He does. You do you. Yeah, he does him. Exactly. What about I listened to another podcast you did where you talked about something, you mentioned dimensionality in his work. I wanted to talk a bit about the kind of makeup of the way the pieces are constructed, and especially the very large, like the still lives, which are huge. And I didn't realize how big they were until I saw them in person at the Louis Vuitton Foundation. And I also saw somewhere in a book I was flicking through the instructions he left for the assembly of these pieces, very, very detailed. And we spoke earlier about the kind of methodology he clearly was very concerned with. What do you think about that? How important was it, all this, the kind of the physical aspect of the works?
I think it was absolutely important. I had mentioned before about his reaction, this sort of visceral, physical reaction to a painting. And I think it kind of begins there. I mean, he talked about this feeling as something that would, as a way that guided him. Like the painting was good because he had that reaction. But I think, the three-dimensionality of the work, the physicality of the work was something that sort of carries through.
I like a stage set.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
It reminded me of being on stage.
Well, I mentioned this idea of, being an active viewer. I mean, it's something that you have to see. It's a painting. It's a picture.
Film lot,
but you have to sort of move around to really comprehend it. And I think he was kind of directing the viewer. Yes, there's one central point of view, and that's how he composed, but the thing is in space, and so it changes as you move. And I think that also really sort of excited him, the fact that the painting could come off the wall, come out into the space, and really engage the viewer in a sort of very visceral, sort of bodily way.
Yeah,
it wasn't just a screen.
Yes.
And I think, one of the wonderful things about the exhibition that we did in Paris was of exploring that idea that it isn't just a screen. There are even instances of the artworks where we actually included a screen. There was a TV in the painting, and you can sort of see, how does that relate to painting? And I think that was really important. But having dimensional works, having things that have functional parts like a radio or a sort of moving part, it was a way of engaging the viewer that was more than just, a flat painted image.
And obviously he was obsessed, or not obsessed, I hate that word. He created series.
He was an extremely methodical producer. And I think it gave him a way to work through ideas systematically so that he could cover all of the possibilities. I mean, I had even mentioned earlier this idea of, there's a series of plastic nudes that was done. And, in each case, the form was the same, but the color shifted. So you have a whole range of skin tones. You have a whole range of hair colors. You have all of these different possibilities. And I think he didn't want to miss anything that might be good, that might, might be perfect.
I like you called it fan fiction, his series, which I really thought was really funny and kind of apt.
Fan fiction? Oh, you mean like the whole idea of sort of remaking things,
responding to a piece that's already there.
Absolutely.
And making it something else, but it.
Yeah, I think he did. He sort of reimagined things, even in terms of art history. I think he sort of reimagines things. He reimagines himself. I mean, you see it in the early work where he's including an image of a Matisse painting within his painting that somehow mimics what's going on or relates, asks us to compare. And that even happens again in the whole series of metalworks where he's, again, reprising this idea of including art historical images as a way of sort of testing what he's doing, and also imposing himself, placing himself in art history.
He was framed as this, the pop artist you haven't heard of. So what's this thing that happened where, we were obviously, you mentioned it earlier, but yes. He was very successful, part of the scene, and then was it just this happens to artists all the time. They get
it does.
Did something happen to him personally, or
no? I think like I had said, artists feel like they haven't gotten enough attention, and it was an idea that he recorded in his writing. So he talked about this idea of being
he
sort of
created
left
this
out.
Character
I kind
Slim
of think
Stealingworth and wrote about it. Yeah,
but I think he kind of created this idea that he had been sort of left out, when in fact he is an extremely important part of art history, and about he is one of the most important sort of pop artists of that period, sort of developing these ideas, pushing these ideas forward, and I think that. I don't know. I think it was a mischaracterization that it was self-deprecating in some sense too.
So he wasn't enough of a show off or a big personality.
Yeah. It's funny. It's one of those things that as an idea that comes up and then gets repeated, and you want to go back and try to find where did it begin, because by the time we hear it later, it feels like something someone else has said.
It feels like a made-up press idea.
Yeah, but then going back through the history, I was, wait a second, that's what he said. Why did he say? Why
he was aware.
He was aware, yeah. Yeah. But this is a wonderful thing about the show in Paris, is that, this is what's going on now. We're going back and we're looking at art history and we're trying to resurrect people who are really important and show them again, show them in a new light. And I think one of the sort of good things about this, okay, if not enough people know, it's a surprise. It's a new story. It's something that we can all get excited about and think, oh, this is new. Yeah. It's not new, but
and new artists are discovering. I know Micheline Thomas has spoken about how much she loves his work, and there's the Louis Vuitton Foundation shows her stuff alongside, and so it is. It's exciting when a new artist.
She's been a really big fan. It's really wonderful. I mean, we worked with her a bit on the retrospective that we did in Montreal in 2012, and Derek Adams has been a big fan as well, and has been to the studio. We've had conversations about Tom's work. I think he was really enamored of what Tom had done, and I think what's wonderful is they're doing art historically very much what Tom would have done. It's like, how do I look to the previous generation and what were they doing? And I'm excited by that. Yeah. What can I do to that? How can I use that? How can I update that? How can I make that important for people today?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was on the New York Times I read. I think it might have been his obituary, actually. I read about how they sort of identified that moment. They suggested maybe it was something to do with what was happening in New York, especially in the 90s with the AIDS pandemic and this sort of turning away from very sexualized
there's the time of images, censorship
which I thought was quite interesting. But now, of course, I was interested to know how young people especially, are responding to the penis pictures, which... you think of social media, like as Brian Boucher said in his piece, dick pics.
Yes.
A very common part of the culture now.
Yes.
So it's a new time. People have a different approach to this.
I've seen a number of young people, making selfies with these paintings. They don't seem particularly shocked by it. I think they may be kind of amused by the sort of openness.
They see the humorous side rather than being offended by something that might be overtly sexual.
Maybe it's a reaction to something that is unexpected and intimate and, sort of surprising.
Yeah. So what's next? You work very closely with all of this, and there's been the massive show in Paris. There's this show here. Is there a growing demand? I actually looked him up online, and they on one of those art ranking websites, and he ranks very highly. I think they
absolutely
said, he's
this
like
is
177th out of 500 top artists or something.
Yes, so. Yeah. Absolutely. This is the funny thing, and I think why the idea of the most famous artist you don't know doesn't really align with reality. It's kind of a funny story,
it's too
maybe,
neat
but
media
it doesn't.
Headline, maybe that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a way of drawing people in, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. So, have you got anything else planned?
We have lots of projects that we're discussing. Nothing sort of firmed up yet, but lots of things that we're sort of discussing and sort of planning. And I think there'll be lots of exciting things coming in the future. I mean, we've had such an amazing response to the show in Paris. It's really been unprecedented for us. I mean, the number of people that saw the work, the number of sort of press reviews and things like that. There's a real sort of really renewed interest in the work. And it's exciting to see that when we bring out the work and really explain it, that people respond so positively, that they're really excited by it.
Well, thank you, because that's thanks to you in great part and the family for bringing it all out. So
yeah, we're all pleased.
I'm delighted to have seen it all. So thank you so much for speaking to me. I love this conversation.
Great. Okay, bye-bye.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Redoitchen. The sound and theme music is by Woogie Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. Please subscribe and leave a review. To pitch for guest ideas, you can DM me via my socials at Danielle Redoitchen. Thanks for listening.